What happens when a man who can buy anything tries to silence a woman who has nothing? This is not just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about the moment when a contemptuous, arrogant magnate, a man accustomed to the world bending to his will, made a simple, brutal demand to a young woman just trying to earn a living. In this country, you speak English. He expected her to crumble. He expected fear. What he received, instead, was a response so shocking, so impossibly fluent in 5 different languages, that it not only left him silent, but crumbled his entire empire. Stay with us to hear the incredible true story of Ara Vance. Italgarde's was not just a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The air itself seemed expensive, laden with the aroma of white truffle, vintage leather, and the quiet, confident murmur of old money. For customers, it was a sanctuary. For staff, a gilded cage where they moved like silent ghosts, their individuality erased and replaced by a pristine black uniform and an unshakable smile. Among these ghosts was Ara Vance. To the casual observer, she was just another waitress, efficient, quiet, possessing a serene grace that made her seem almost invisible, a perfect cog in Italgarde's impeccable machine. She was 24, but a weariness in her deep green eyes made her appear older. Her movements were precise, born of a discipline that seemed out of place among the clinking of silverware and porcelain. Her colleague, a bubbly, perpetually stressed waitress named Chloe, often joked that Ara could carry a tray of champagne glasses through a hurricane without spilling a drop. "You're a machine, Ara," Chloe whispered one Tuesday afternoon as they polished wine glasses behind the service bar. "I swear, you don't even breathe the same air as the rest of us mortals." Ara offered a small, sad smile. "I'm just focused, Chloe. You know how Marco gets?" Marco, the restaurant manager, was a man whose backbone was made of jelly and whose temperament was dictated by a client's tip size. He orbited the room with a perpetual cringe, terrified of offending the titans of industry who treated Edelgarde's as their private cafeteria. And there was no titan more fearsome than Damian Blackwell. His name was spoken in whispers among the staff. Blackwell, wealthy, was a force of nature, a corporate raider who had built Blackwell Industries from nothing into a global colossus. He was ruthless, sharp-tongued, and notoriously impatient. He dined at Edelgarde's 3 times a week, always at table 7, a secluded booth in a corner that offered a commanding view of the entire room. He demanded perfection, treating staff not as people but as extensions of the furniture. "He's coming tonight," Marco announced during the pre-service meeting, his voice trembling slightly. "Table 7, 8 o'clock sharp. He's hosting a potential partner from France. I want everything, and I mean everything, to be impeccable. Ara, you're in his section. You're the only one I trust not to crack." A collective sigh of relief swept through other waiters. Serving Blackwell was a trial by fire. He returned a steak if it was a single degree above medium rare. He complained if ice in his water melted too quickly and his gaze could curdle cream. Ara simply nodded. "Of course, Marco." Inside, however, a familiar knot of ice tightened in her stomach. It wasn't just Blackwell's temperament that unnerved her. It was him. The sight of his face, the severe jaw, the cold, calculating blue eyes, the perfectly cut suits that cost more than her annual salary. It was like a physical blow. Every time he entered the restaurant, he was a ghost of a past she had fought desperately to bury. A past of unimaginable privilege, and even more unimaginable pain. She had once lived in his world. She had attended galas in halls grander than this. She had spoken with world leaders, and had never worried about the price of anything. That life had been shattered, burned to the ground by betrayal and scandal. Her family, named Vance, once synonymous with philanthropy and integrity, now was a toxic whisper in the circles Blackwell frequented. Her father, Robert Vance, had been his mentor, his friend, and Damian Blackwell had been the architect of his fall. Now here she was, Ara Vance, the exile, reduced to serving the very man who had destroyed her family, stolen her legacy, and left her with nothing but a new name and a desperate need to remain invisible. She was not just a waitress, she was a survivor hiding in plain sight, and tonight she was about to serve her monster. As the clock neared 8 p.m., Ara meticulously checked table 7. The silverware was aligned with military precision. The crystal glasses were so clean they seemed to disappear. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing her apron. She was no longer Ara Vance, daughter of Robert Vance. Tonight, she was just a waitress. She had to be. Her survival depended on it. At 8 o'clock sharp, Edelgarde's heavy oak doors swung open. Damian Blackwell entered not so much walking as conquering the space before him. He was a man in his mid-40s, his dark hair lightly streaked with silver at the temples, radiating an aura of raw, unapologetic power. Behind him came a shorter, older gentleman with a kind face and impeccably coiffed gray hair, who seemed slightly overwhelmed by Blackwell's pace. This was Jean-Luc Dubois, the French investor. Marco scurried forward, bowing and scraping. "Mr. Blackwell, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Blackwell didn't even look at him, his eyes scanning the restaurant with an air of bored ownership. "Of course it is." He led his guest to table 7, settling into the booth and immediately pulling out his phone. Ara watched from the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. Be invisible. Be a ghost. She took 2 leather-bound menus and a bottle of sparkling water. She put on her professional smile and approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Edelgard's. May I offer you some water to start?" her calm, even voice asked. Blackwell didn't look up from his phone. "Still, make it quick." Mr. Dubois, however, offered her a warm smile. "Good evening. For me, sparkling water, please." Without missing a beat, Ara replied in impeccable French with a Parisian accent. "Bien sûr, monsieur. Un choix excellent." "Of course, sir. An excellent choice." She turned to fill his glass from the bottle she held. For the first time, Damien Blackwell looked up. His cold eyes, like a winter sky, narrowed on her. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Clearly he hadn't understood the exchange and hated being out of anything. Mr. Dubois was delighted. "Continue in French. It's a delight to hear my own language spoken so beautifully. Are you French? My family has roots there, sir." Ara replied softly, still in French. "I am glad to make you feel at home." Blackwell slammed his phone on the table. The sound made Marco, who was hovering 10 feet away, jump. "Enough!" Blackwell's voice was a low growl that cut through the restaurant's ambiance. Heads at nearby tables turned. "I'm conducting business here in America with an American company." He fixed his piercing gaze on Ara, his lip curling in a sneer. "You will speak English. Only English. Understood?" The condescension in his tone was suffocating. He didn't see a person, he saw a disobedient appliance. Mr. Dubois looked embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "Damien, please." She was only being courteous. "I don't pay for courtesy, Jean-Luc. I pay for service." Blackwell's eyes snapped, still fixed on Ara. "So let's try this again. From the top, in English." The world seemed to slow for Ara. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to become invisible again. It was the safe thing. But something inside her, a long-dormant spark of Vance pride from the brilliant, educated woman she once was, refused to be extinguished. She looked at the face of the man who had flattered her father before stabbing him in the back, the man who had taken her home, her name, her future, and was now ordering her to be small. She held his gaze. The empty, polite waitress smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, unreadable composure. She turned first to Mr. Dubois and spoke in his native tongue. "Monsieur, je vous prie d'excuser cette interruption. Votre confort est ma priorité." Then she shifted her stance slightly and addressed Blackwell, but the words that came out were not English. They were in crisp, perfect Italian, her tone as sharp as broken glass. "Signore, la sua maleducazione è pari solo alla sua ignoranza." Here, courtesy is the universal language. Blackwell's jaw slackened. He stared at her, utterly bewildered. He understood nothing but the defiant tone. Before he could react, she shifted again, her expression hardening. This time the words were in fluid, cutting Spanish. "Perhaps if you treated people with a modicum of respect, you wouldn't need to demand they stoop to your level." Mr. Dubois's eyes were wide with a mixture of shock and nascent amusement. Marco looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Ara wasn't finished. She straightened to her full height, her voice now flowing in precise, articulate German, a language known for its authority. "A man of your position should know that true power lies not in commanding, but in understanding." By then, a stunned silence had fallen over the surrounding tables. Everyone was staring. Damien Blackwell, the master of the universe, the man who silenced boardrooms with a single word, was being verbally dismantled by a waitress in 4 languages he couldn't comprehend. His face, usually a mask of cold control, was a canvas of pure, undiluted fury and humiliation. Finally, Ara looked directly into his eyes. She leaned in just a little, her voice dropping to a calm, clear, impeccably enunciated Oxford English, the kind of English spoken in the halls of power he so desperately admired. "But of course, Mr. Blackwell, you are the customer and demand English, so in English I will be happy to take your order, or perhaps you need a few more moments to compose yourself." The sting of her final sentence in perfect English was the most potent blow of all. It wasn't just an answer, it was a declaration. She hadn't just spoken, she had shown him that his world was small and hers was vast. The waitress he had tried to humiliate was, at that moment, entirely his superior. And in the dead silence of the opulent dining room, Damien Blackwell had no idea what to do. The silence that followed Ara's multilingual tour de force was deafening. It stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Damien Blackwell's face had cycled through a spectrum of emotions: shock, rage, and now a deeply unsettling, calculating stillness. His mask of control was back in place, but the fury behind his eyes burned hotter than ever. He had been publicly outmaneuvered, his authority shattered by an employee he wouldn't have recognized on the street half an hour earlier. Without a word, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping violently against the marble floor, tossed his napkin onto the table. "Jean-Luc, we're leaving." Mr. Dubois, looking both mortified and deeply impressed, began to protest. "Damien, wait." She was quite remarkable. "Now," Blackwell commanded, his voice a low threat. He stalked towards the exit without looking back. Mr. Dubois gave Ara one final, apologetic glance before hurrying after his host. The moment the doors slammed shut behind them, the restaurant erupted into a whirlwind of whispers. Ara stood frozen by the table, her adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a cold dread. She had won the battle, but she was certain she had just lost the war. Her job, her anonymity, her carefully constructed refuge. It was all about to disappear. Marco scurried over, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "What have you done, Ara?" he hissed, his voice trembling with fear and anger. "Are you insane? That was Damien Blackwell. He could buy this entire city block and turn it into a parking lot just to spite us." "He was rude, Marco," Chloe said, appearing at her side, a look of awe on her face. "He deserved it. That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen." "Incredible? She's fired. That's what's incredible," Marco spluttered, wringing his hands. "Ara, my office now." As Ara walked through the dining room, she could feel every eye on her, but one pair of eyes had a different quality. They belonged to an elderly gentleman sitting alone at a small table by the window. He was impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket with kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He hadn't been whispering. He had been observing the entire exchange with a keen, analytical interest. As Ara passed, he met her gaze and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The gesture was so small, yet it sent a strange chill of validation through her. Inside Marco's cramped office, the lecture was as predictable as it was frantic. He paced back and forth, ranting about profit margins, reputation, and the wrath of Damien Blackwell. "I have no choice. I have to let you go. Your final check will be mailed. Please, just clean out your locker and leave quietly." Ara simply nodded. She had expected it. "I understand, Marco." There was no point in arguing. She had known the consequences. She changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room, her hands trembling slightly. Chloe found her there. "Don't you worry about this, Ara," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "Any restaurant in New York would kill to have you. That was legendary. You're my hero." "Thanks, Chloe," Ara said, managing a weak smile. But as she stepped out the back door into the cool night air, the reality of her situation hit her. She was out of a job, with barely enough money for next month's rent. Blackwell knew her face. Her invisibility was gone. What if he decided to investigate deeper? What if he found out who she really was? The fear that had kept Ara going for so long came rushing back. Meanwhile, in the back of his chauffeured SUV, Damien Blackwell was silent, staring out at the blurred city lights. The humiliation gnawed at him. It wasn't just that a waitress had defied him. It was the way she had done it, with an intellectual and cultural superiority he couldn't buy or intimidate. It was a language of the world he didn't speak, and it infuriated him. He pulled out his phone and made a call, not to his chauffeur, but to his head of security, a ruthless former Mossad operative named Kyle. "Kyle," Blackwell's voice was dangerously calm. "I have a task for you. The waitress at table 7 at Italgarde's tonight, the one with the green eyes. I want to know everything about her, her name, her address, where she was born, what she had for breakfast this morning. Everything, and I want it on my desk by morning." He hung up. This was no longer about firing a waitress. It was about power. He needed to understand the weapon that had been used against him. He needed to know who she was. He had a hunch, a cold feeling deep in his gut, that she was more than just a waitress. And Damien Blackwell hated surprises. Back on the street outside the restaurant, Ara pulled her worn coat tighter and began the long walk to the subway. As she turned the corner onto a quieter side street, a calm voice spoke from the shadows. "That was an extraordinary display, Miss Vance." Ara froze, her blood turning to ice. Vance. He had used her real name. She whirled around to see the elderly gentleman from the restaurant stepping out from a doorway. He had a gentle smile, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. "Who are you?" Ara demanded, her voice tight with alarm, taking a step back. "How do you know that name?" "My name is Alistair Finch," he said, extending a hand which she ignored. "And I knew your father. Robert was one of my dearest friends. I was his lawyer and his confidant for over 20 years. Ara stared at him, her mind reeling. Alistair Finch. The name was familiar, a relic from a buried life. He was the one who had tried to fight for her father, the one who disappeared after the trial, after everything was lost. "I've been looking for you for 3 years, Ara," Alistair said, his voice soft with sympathy. "Ever since you disappeared, I never for a second believed what they said about your father. I know who was behind it all." He gestured back towards Edelgard's, where the lights still shone warmly. "You just served him dinner," Alistair said, his voice grim. "And tonight, you did something I've been trying to do for years. You got under Damien Blackwell's skin. You made him lose control, and in doing so you may have just given us the opening we've been waiting for." He pulled a plain white business card from his pocket. "He will come for you now, not to fire you, but to understand you. When he does, you'll be ready. Call me. It's time to stop hiding, Ara. It's time to fight back." He pressed the card into her hand and melted back into the shadows, leaving Ara standing alone on the sidewalk, the small piece of cardboard in her palm, feeling as heavy as the keys to her entire past. The sun rose over Manhattan, but Damien Blackwell had not slept. He sat in his penthouse office, a glass cage overlooking Central Park, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. On the polished obsidian surface of his desk lay a single file, delivered by his head of security, Kyle, an hour earlier. The file's cover was stark white, bearing a single name, Vance. He had expected to find a story of a struggling immigrant, perhaps a student, working her way through college. He had anticipated a simple, easily digestible narrative that would explain her linguistic talents and appease the burning humiliation of the previous night. What he found, instead, was a ghost. He opened the file. The first page was a photograph, a professional headshot from 3 years ago. The young woman in the picture was smiling, her green eyes bright with a life and hope he hadn't seen in the weary waitress. Her name was listed as Ara Annalise Vance. Date of birth, May 12, 2001. Place of birth, New York, New York. And then the line that made the air in the room grow cold. Daughter of Robert and Eleanor Vance. Blackwell felt a jolt as if he'd touched a live wire. Vance. It couldn't be. He read it again, his mind racing, connecting the dots with the brutal efficiency that had made him a billionaire. The hair, the eyes, the aristocratic poise she had displayed even in a waitress's uniform. It was all there. It was her, the daughter of the man he had destroyed. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in the silent room. A flood of long-suppressed memories surfaced. He saw Robert Vance not as the discredited felon the world remembered, but as the man he had been, brilliant, kind, a titan of ethical investment and philanthropy, who had taken a young, hungry Damien Blackwell under his wing. Robert had been his mentor, his champion, the closest thing he had ever had to a father. "Business is about building, Damien, not just acquiring," Robert used to say, his voice filled with warmth as they stood on the construction site of a new community center funded by the Vance Foundation. "You build wealth, yes, but you also build communities, you build futures. That is the true legacy." Damien had admired him, even loved him in his own way, but the admiration had soured into envy. Robert's vision was about legacy. Damien's was about power. He saw Robert's philanthropy not as noble, but as a weakness, a diversion of funds that could be used for aggressive expansion. He saw Robert's trust as a vulnerability to exploit. The betrayal had been a masterpiece of corporate warfare. It was slow, meticulous, and utterly devastating. For 2 years, Blackwell had created a shadow network of shell corporations. He had siphoned off small, untraceable amounts from the Vance Foundation's international accounts, redirecting them through a labyrinth of offshore entities before funneling them into a single account in the Cayman Islands, an account opened in Robert Vance's name using forged documents. The final move was to orchestrate an anonymous tip to the SEC. He had manufactured a paper trail that painted Robert as a hypocrite and a thief, a man who preached charity while secretly embezzling millions for himself. The evidence was circumstantial, but expertly crafted. Blackwell, as Robert's trusted protege and COO, was the one who tearfully discovered the final piece of fabricated evidence. He played the part of the heartbroken disciple, forced to expose his fallen idol. The trial was a media circus. Robert Vance, a man renowned for his integrity, was crucified. He maintained his innocence, but the web Blackwell had woven was too intricate. He was convicted of fraud and embezzlement, his reputation shattered, his fortune frozen, and his company, Vance Global, left vulnerable. With the company teetering on the brink of collapse, Damian Blackwell, the hero who had uncovered the truth, stepped in. Using his own rapidly growing capital, he launched a hostile takeover, buying the company for pennies on the dollar. He absorbed its assets, its technology, and its charitable foundation, renaming everything under the umbrella of Blackwell Industries. He had not just defeated his mentor, he had consumed him, erasing his legacy and writing his own over it. Robert Vance died in prison less than a year later. The official cause of death, a heart attack. The world said it was a weak heart broken by shame. Blackwell knew it was a strong heart broken by betrayal. Robert's wife, Eleanor, had succumbed to illness shortly after, and in their daughter, Ara, the brilliant young linguist who had been studying at the Sorbonne in Paris, had simply disappeared. Blackwell had assumed she had taken what little money was left and vanished, broken and defeated. He had been wrong. She hadn't fled, she had hidden. She had buried herself in the heart of his city, taking a menial job, living a life of anonymity right under his nose for 3 years. A cold, terrifying thought crept into his mind. Was it a coincidence? Had she simply ended up at his favorite restaurant by chance? Or was it something more? Was she hunting him? The defiance in her eyes last night. It wasn't just an angry waitress. It was the righteous fury of a daughter defending her father's memory. Blackwell stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The waitress was no longer a puzzle. She was a threat, a loose end from the most ruthless chapter of his life. A chapter he thought was closed forever. She was a living reminder of the one thing he feared, the truth. He had built his empire on the ruins of her family. He had taken everything from her, and now she had taken something from him, his peace of mind. He turned back to his desk, his decision made. He couldn't crush her as he would a normal business rival. That would be too noisy, too suspicious. He couldn't make her disappear. That would draw attention. No. This required a different strategy, one Robert Vance himself had taught him long ago. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He picked up his phone and dialed his personal assistant. Catherine, get me on the line with Edelgard's. I want to speak to the manager. He paused, a cruel, brilliant plan forming in his mind. No, second thought, cancel that. Find me the home address of the waitress from last night, the one Kyle researched. Her name is Vance. I'm going to pay her a visit. I have a job offer for her. He would bring her into his world, into his company, control her, watch her, and if necessary, completely break her. He would turn Robert Vance's ghost into his prized possession. Ara spent a sleepless night on the sagging couch of her tiny fourth-floor walk-up apartment in Queens. The business card Alastair Finch had given her lay on the wobbly coffee table, a stark white rectangle that represented either a lifeline or a trap. The name Vance, spoken aloud after so many years, still echoed in her ears. Her carefully constructed anonymity was gone. Morning brought with it the harsh reality of her situation, jobless, dwindling savings, and the looming shadow of Damian Blackwell. She spent hours online, researching Alastair Finch. The search results confirmed everything he had said. He was a highly respected corporate lawyer, known for his fierce loyalty to his clients. He had defended her father with a passion bordering on obsession, and then, after the verdict, had quietly retired from his high-profile firm, disappearing from public life. He was a man of integrity, a man her father had implicitly trusted. Finally, with a trembling hand, she dialed the number on the card. Alastair answered on the first ring. I expected you would call. His voice was a calm anchor in her sea of anxiety. She told him everything, about losing her job, about the constant fear, about the suffocating weight of hiding for 3 years. You were never hiding, my dear, Alastair said gently. You were surviving. There's a difference. Your father would be so proud of the strength you've shown." Hearing those words, a dam inside her broke, and she wept for the first time in years. For her father, for her mother, for the life that had been stolen from her. Alistair listened patiently. When she finished, his tone turned serious. "Blackwell's investigation will be done by now. He knows who you are. He won't see you as a threat to eliminate. Not yet. He'll see you as an unknown variable to control. He will make a move, probably something audacious and unexpected. He'll want to have you where he can see you." "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For 3 years I've been gathering evidence against him," Alistair explained. "I have financial records, sworn affidavits from former Vance Global employees he forced out, but it's all circumstantial, just like the evidence he used against your father. We're missing the final piece, the smoking gun, something from inside his inner circle, something that ties him directly to the initial fraud. We need a key to his kingdom." A knock on her apartment door, loud and firm, made her jump. "Someone's at my door," she whispered frantically into the phone. "Stay calm, Ara." Alistair's voice was firm. "This is it. This is a move. Whatever he offers you, however he frames it, your answer must be yes. You need to become the key." Her heart pounded as she peered through the peephole. She didn't see a hulking security guard or a process server. She saw Damien Blackwell himself standing in her building's grimy hallway, looking utterly and dangerously out of place in his tailored suit. Ara took a deep breath, ended the call with Alistair, and opened the door. Blackwell's eyes swept over her small apartment, taking in the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the stack of linguistics and history books by her bed. It was a look of arrogant, profound pity. "Quite a fall from the Sorbonne, Miss Vance," his voice said, soft as poison. He didn't wait for an invitation, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "What do you want?" Ara asked, her voice steel. She refused to let him see her fear. "I admire talent," he said, circling her living room like a predator assessing a den. "And what you did last night, while wildly inappropriate for a waitress, was a remarkable display of talent, a talent wasted." He stopped in front of her, his presence seeming to suck all the oxygen from the room. "I am a man who collects rare and valuable things, art, companions, people. Your linguistic ability is a rare commodity. I have a proposition for you." Ara remained silent, her expression a mask of neutrality, just as Alistair had instructed. "I am expanding Blackwell Industries into several new international markets," he continued. "Russia, China, the Middle East. It requires delicate negotiations, a deep understanding of culture and language that my current team lacks. I need a special advisor, a personal translator who can move between these worlds seamlessly. The position comes with a 6-figure salary, a corporate apartment in my own building, and access to resources you can only dream of." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. It was a gilded cage, beautifully crafted and designed to imprison her. He was offering her a pale imitation of the life he had stolen, a life where her talents would serve his ambition. "Why me?" she asked, her voice level. A smirk played on his lips. "Let's call it a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps your father's situation was more complex than it appeared. Perhaps I feel a certain responsibility for my former mentor's daughter." It was a lie, a manipulative twist of the knife, and they both knew it. He was testing her, seeing if she would break, if she would accuse him. This was the moment. Alistair's words echoed in her mind. Become the key. She had to swallow her rage, her grief, her hatred, and play his game. She met his gaze, her green eyes holding his for a long moment. Then she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "You wish to hire me for my linguistic skills, Mr. Blackwell?" Her voice was devoid of emotion. "Very well. I accept your offer." Damien Blackwell smiled a cold, triumphant smile. He believed he had won. He had found the ghost that haunted him and put it on a leash, making it another of his prized possessions. He had no idea he had just willingly handed his greatest enemy the keys to his kingdom. The waitress was no longer a waitress. She was a Trojan horse, and she had just been welcomed inside the gates of Troy. The transition from a cramped walk-up in Queens to a minimalist, sleek corporate apartment on the 50th floor of Blackwell Tower was dizzying. One day she was counting tips to make rent. The next she was looking down at the city from a window that seemed to span the horizon. The apartment was furnished in cold, expensive taste. all chrome, glass, and black leather. It felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed prison cell, a gilded cage, just as she had imagined. Her new role as Damien Blackwell's special advisor and personal translator thrust her into the very heart of his empire. Her desk was situated in an office adjacent to his own penthouse suite, separated only by a smart video panel that he could switch from transparent to opaque with the touch of a button. She was always on display, always under his watchful eye. The first few weeks were a relentless test. Blackwell paraded her around like a new acquisition. In a video conference with German industrialists, he would impatiently gesticulate towards her. "Ara, tell them their profit-sharing proposal is an insult, but do it in a way that sounds like a compliment." She would seamlessly translate his brutal demands into diplomatically nuanced German, softening his abrasive style and often saving the deal. During a tense negotiation with a Russian oligarch over oil futures, she caught a subtle mistranslation by the other party's interpreter, a single word that shifted the liability clause by billions of dollars. She quietly corrected it in flawless Russian, earning a rare, fleeting look of genuine surprise from Blackwell. She played her part perfectly. She was diligent, efficient, and emotionally detached. To Blackwell and his executive team, she was an enigma, a linguistic prodigy with a mysterious past, utterly dedicated to her work. They saw her talent, but they were blind to her purpose. Every night, after the long days navigating corporate shark-infested waters, she would return to her silent apartment and report to Alistair. "He's arrogant," she told him over an encrypted line. "His whole system is built on the assumption that no one is smart enough to challenge him. Security is focused outward to stop corporate espionage from his rivals. He's not looking for a threat from the inside. That's our advantage." Alistair's voice crackled back. "The evidence we need is a digital ledger. I call it Project Nightingale. It was a shadow accounting system your father suspected Blackwell was using even before the takeover. It would detail the initial diversion of funds from the Vance Foundation. It's the source code of his original sin. If it still exists, it will be on his central server, likely hidden behind layers of encryption." Ara's mission was clear. She had to find Project Nightingale. She began to use her unique position to her advantage. Her job required her to have high-level clearance to access documents for translation. She started staying late, citing the need to prepare for an upcoming meeting with Japanese investors. Under the guise of studying financial reports, she began mapping Blackwell's server architecture. She used her knowledge of languages to her advantage, exploring files in different languages that other employees would overlook. One afternoon, while translating a series of old internal memos from Spanish, she found a reference to a server migration project from 5 years ago, right around the time of the Vance Global takeover. The project leader was Blackwell's head of technology, a man named Gavin Thorne. The memo mentioned a legacy data preservation protocol for an obsolete philanthropic asset, the Vance Foundation. This was her first real clue. Getting to Gavin Thorne was impossible. He was intensely private and fiercely loyal to Blackwell. So Ara targeted his deputy, a junior programmer who was struggling to learn Mandarin for a new project in Shanghai. Ara coincidentally met him in the company cafeteria and offered to help. Over several tutoring sessions, she subtly steered the conversation towards server security and data archiving. Feigning technical ignorance, she asked innocent-sounding questions about how one would find very old, heavily encrypted files. "The old man's paranoid," the programmer grumbled one day, frustrated with a piece of code. "He keeps the really ancient stuff on what we call the Edelgard server. It's a ghost server, isolated from the main network. You can only physically access it from Thorne's office terminal. Well, from the boss's personal console in the penthouse." The penthouse. The lion's den itself. An opportunity presented itself a week later. Blackwell was hosting a lavish dinner party for a delegation from the United Arab Emirates. He needed Ara present to translate. The dinner was to be held in the main entertainment area of his penthouse residence, 2 floors above his offices. "I'll need you on call all night," he commanded. "Stay in the penthouse study. Don't move." As the party commenced, Ara was escorted to the study, a magnificent room lined with rare books, and in the corner, on a massive mahogany desk, was Damien Blackwell's personal computer terminal. It was the console the programmer had mentioned. Her heart pounded. This was her chance. She had an hour, perhaps 2, while Blackwell was occupied with his guests. She had a small USB drive given to her by Alistair, containing a sophisticated decryption program. She sat at the desk, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She bypassed the initial layers of security using a password she had guessed weeks ago, Vance 98. The year Black had first joined her father's company. The arrogance of it made her sick. She was in. She navigated to the ghost server, the so-called Edelgard server, named after the very restaurant where her new life had begun. And there it was, a single file, wrapped in layers of heavy encryption, named simply Nightingale. She inserted the USB drive. The decryption program began its work, lines of code scrolling rapidly across the screen. The progress bar moved agonizingly slow, 10%, 25%, 50%. Suddenly she heard voices approaching the study. Blackwell's laughter, low and commanding, resonated from the hallway. He was coming back. Panic seized her. The progress bar was at 78%. She couldn't abort the transfer now. She had to create a distraction. Thinking fast, she scanned the room. Her eyes landed on a crystal whiskey decanter on a nearby table. She grabbed it, rushed to the door, and as Blackwell and one of his guests reached the threshold, she tripped, sending the decanter crashing to the floor. Amber liquid and crystal fragments scattered across the expensive rug. "Oh my goodness, Mr. Blackwell, I'm so sorry," she cried, feigning panic and clumsiness. "I was just going to fetch you a glass of water and I tripped." Blackwell looked from her to the mess on the floor, his face a mask of pure annoyance. "Clumsy girl," he growled. "Have one of the house staff clean this up and get out of my sight. Go back to the office. I'll call you if I need you." "Yes, Mr. Blackwell. I'm so very sorry," she stammered, backing out of the room. As he turned his attention back to his guest, grumbling about the incompetence of his staff, Ara glanced back at the computer screen. 99%. 100%. Transfer complete. She pulled the USB from the port with a trembling hand just as a cleaner was summoned. She had it. She had the smoking gun. She had walked into the lion's den and stolen his most valuable secret right under his nose. Now, all she had to do was get it to Alistair before the lion realized he'd been robbed. The next 48 hours were the most agonizing of Ara's life. She sent the encrypted file to Alistair immediately using a secure drop, but she still had to go to work and face Damien Blackwell, pretending that nothing had happened. She had to sit in his video office, translating contracts and fielding calls, while Alistair and his team of forensic accountants worked frantically to decrypt and verify the contents of the Nightingale file. Blackwell was more volatile than usual, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. He seemed to sense that something was wrong, a shift in the power dynamic he couldn't quite pinpoint. His cold blue eyes often rested on Ara, searching, probing, as if trying to see past the facade of the efficient employee to the enemy within. On the third day, the call came. It was a prearranged text from Alistair. "Nightingale is singing. It's time." It was a full confession in numbers. The file contained the original, unaltered records of the Vance Foundation's accounts, showing the small, systematic withdrawals. It also contained a separate ledger detailing exactly where that money was moved through Blackwell's shell corporations, and finally a record of the deposits into the forged Cayman Islands account. It was the complete map of his betrayal. Alistair had already sent the package to trusted contacts at the Department of Justice and the Wall Street Journal. The fuse had been lit. That afternoon, Ara was summoned to Blackwell's office. The smart video panel was opaque. When she entered, she found him not at his desk, but standing by the vast window, looking down at the city. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. "Server logs from my penthouse study show an unauthorized data transfer 2 nights ago," his voice said, dangerously calm. He didn't turn to face her. A very large, heavily encrypted file was copied from a ghost partition, the drive we call Edelgard. Ara's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir." "Wouldn't you?" He turned slowly. In his hand was a single sheet of paper. He held it up. It was a printout of the surveillance log showing her login credentials accessing the server. "It appears your password was used, Miss Vance." She knew the game was up. "It was a fitting name for the server, don't you think?" she replied, her voice steady, all pretense gone. "The place where the waitress you underestimated began the end of your empire." A flicker of shock crossed his face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "You have nothing. A stolen file is inadmissible. My lawyers will bury you in litigation until you're old and gray." "It's not about a court case anymore, Damien," she said, using his first name for the first time. The sound of it from her lips seemed to physically hurt him. "It's about the truth. The Wall Street Journal is running its front-page story in about 20 minutes. The SEC has already called an emergency hearing. The DOJ is preparing an indictment. Your board of directors is currently in a meeting to which I imagine you were not invited." She watched him, the color draining from his face as the reality of his situation crashed over him. He had been so focused on the legal battle, he hadn't anticipated the public evisceration. "Why?" he whispered, the word laced with disbelief. "I gave you everything, the money, the status." "You gave me a cage," Ara shot back, her voice ringing with 3 years of suppressed fury. "You offered me trinkets after stealing my family's legacy. You destroyed my father, a man who treated you like a son. All for this." She gestured to the opulent office, the city below, for a kingdom built on lies. "You didn't just steal his company, you stole his name, and that's what I'm taking back." His face contorted in rage. He took a threatening step towards her. "You little—" At that exact moment, the doors to his office burst open. 2 stern-faced individuals in dark suits, followed by several uniformed officers, strode in. One of them held up a badge. "Damien Blackwell," the lead agent said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." Blackwell looked from the agents to Ara, his expression one of impotent fury. The master of the universe was trapped, his power fading like smoke. As they put him in handcuffs, their eyes met one last time. In them she saw no remorse, only the cold, hard realization of defeat. She walked out of the office, past the stunned faces of executive assistants, and didn't look back. She took the elevator to the ground floor, stepped out of Blackwell Tower into the bright afternoon sun, and for the first time in years, felt truly free. Damien Blackwell's fall was swift and spectacular. The Nightingale file was irrefutable. His empire crumbled, his assets were seized, and the truth of his betrayal was exposed for the world to see. More importantly, the Vance name was cleared. Robert Vance was posthumously exonerated, his story rewritten from one of shame to one of tragedy and honor. Ara, with Alistair's help, used the restored family assets not to rebuild a corporation, but to relaunch her father's true legacy, the Vance Foundation. She became its public face, its driving force. Her linguistic skills were no longer a hidden weapon, but a powerful tool for good. She traveled the world, negotiating aid packages in fluent Arabic in refugee camps, securing educational grants in Mandarin in rural China, and advocating for human rights in Spanish at the UN. She became everything her father had hoped she would be, a builder of futures. She had taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into her greatest strength, proving that true power isn't about how loudly you can demand to be heard in one language, but how deeply you can connect with people in many. Ara Vance's story is a powerful reminder that strength isn't always loud. It can be the quiet dignity of a waitress, the hidden knowledge of a scholar, or the unwavering love of a daughter. Damien Blackwell believed his wealth made him invincible, but he forgot that true power lies in character, intelligence, and the courage to speak the truth, no matter what language it's in. Ara not only gained justice for her father, she reclaimed her own identity and turned a weapon of hate into a tool for healing across the globe. What did you think of Ara's incredible journey? Was her revenge justified? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Stories of Black Women, for more incredible, true stories of hidden heroes and justice served. Thanks for watching.